Well, first of all, we're in Revelation chapter 21. And we are going to slow down. We're going to move very slowly from this point on. In fact, in the last two chapters, we're going to spend maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And the reason being, our eternal home is eternal. I'm sure that if you bought a house somewhere along the way, even rented one, you spent a lot of time studying the community, the schools, everything around it, what the environment is. And yet, we don't spend a lot of time talking about our eternal home. What it's going to be like, what we're going to do. We're going to talk about all those things. And so again, if I'm only covering 8 verses today, and I might not get through the 8. That's how slow we're going to be moving through these last 2 chapters. But also I'm going to talk a little bit about the road ahead. When we finish Revelation, we're going to go back and do the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. It adds a lot of detail and facts about the end times as well. We did them in conjunction last time. I chose not to do it this time, but we'll go back to Daniel. Then we're going to come back to the New Testament, to the book of Hebrews, just so you know where we're going from here. Okay, I think with that, I'm going to start off this morning by reading Hebrews 11, verses 8 through 10. I think it'll lay the foundation for what we're talking about. It says, "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God." We're going to talk a lot about that city. Actually, there's going to be 2 cities that we're going to be talking about as we move into the end times here. But that city is going to be really something special. A TV producer for the British Broadcasting Corporation was preparing a documentary about Christianity in England. In the course of the research, he sent a memo to a clergyman who served as an advisor to the BBC on church affairs. The memo read, "How might I ascertain the official church view on heaven and hell?" The clergyman replied with a memo consisting of only one word: die. You heard our daughter mention Pamela earlier, and she believes, although we don't yet, that she's facing death. She said, "Dad, I'm not afraid of death, I'm afraid of dying. I don't know what I have to go through to get there." And that's probably true, all of us. We know where our destination is going to be, but getting there is a mystery. So, fortunately, we don't have to guess about discovering God's truth about heaven and hell. Well, by the way, we spent a couple of chapters, many chapters before that, going through the judgments and all those things, and then we saw what hell really was when death and Hades were cast into hell, along with the Antichrist and the false prophet. Now, in the next few weeks, we're going to be able to talk about heaven, which is a much more pleasant subject, to say the least. Jesus said in John 14:2, and this chapter, goes to funerals a lot. He said, "I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also." That's what these last 2 chapters are about. That place that Jesus said he's preparing for us, and that we're going to be with him in that place. This place is a real, tangible place. Just like the place you live in here. Only a million times better. We don't hear or see a lot of good news today. Really? We turn on the TV, we hear about coronavirus, people getting sick, people dying, the stock market is crashing, and then we hear the debates on TV how everything is going to hell in a handbag. And Mark Twain said one time, if we got 1/10 of what the people running for president promised, there would be no need for heaven. I think that's pretty good, true. But the final 2 chapters of Revelation is good news indeed. A former member of this church and his family were good friends of ours. They're no longer attending this church, but the wife, which I won't mention her name, came to me, and they had 3 young children at that particular time, said, Sonny, our youngest son doesn't want to go to heaven. He thinks it's going to be a boring place. Well, a lot you hear about heaven is not very exciting. You know, floating on a cloud, playing a harp or something like that. He just doesn't want to go there. Can you talk to him? Well, I took him in the other room, and about 15 minutes, 30 minutes later we come out. He was all excited about heaven. He hadn't really heard about what heaven is really like. We're going to talk about what heaven is going to be really like. Now, let me just mention a few things we're going to do there. Very biblical, and it's going to be a lot. Now, there's 2 places that I like to look when we talk about what heaven is going to be like. One is the Garden of Eden. That's the place like what God intended it for us to be here on this earth had not sin come in. So if you look at the Garden of Eden and what Adam and Eve was given there and what they were given to do, the first thing I think about is that we're going to create things. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, God created all of these animals and he brought them to Adam to name. Now that's creating, isn't it? Named every one of them. You imagine how creative he had to be and look at a moose or a cow or whatever he was looking at and saying, your name is Moose. We struggled to name our own babies. He had to name thousands of these animals that came there. The next thing I think about we're going to do there is we're going to eat and drink. Jesus ate and drank in his resurrected body, and I think we can look to what Jesus did in his resurrected body after he came back from the dead and say, we're going to do that too, because we're going to be like him. The other thing I believe we'll do is to explore. God has been around for eternity. You think he's been twiddling his thumbs, waiting till we came along? Now, we're a very, very important part of his creation, don't get me wrong. But for eternity, he's been around creating things. We're going to explore all the things he's created for eternity. The next thing we look at, or I look at, that we're going to do is we're going to work. Now, some of you may have enjoyed your work here while you were here. Some of you may not have. Some of you just looked at it as work to get by, but our work throughout eternity is going to be fun. I can tell you that. Adam was given work to do when he was put in the garden. Now, the work originally he was given to do was to take care of the garden, to till the soil, do all these different things. Only after sin came in did it become by the sweat of the brow. But originally, it was fun work. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to learn. We're not going to get into heaven and get a download of all the information that's ever been since the beginning, or a download of the mind of God. We're going to learn. And learning is fun. Learning is exciting. I think the next thing we're going to do is we're going to fellowship. Isn't it fun to meet relatives or friends that you really love, you haven't seen for a long time? We're going to fellowship. And we're going to get to know a lot of new people we're going to fellowship with. The other thing I think we're going to do is teach. Because there's going to be children, I believe, in heaven, and I think this is my own theory, they're going to grow up to be 30 years old, and that's where they'll stay. I think those of us that are a lot more than that will come back to the prime of our life. It's been Scientists have told us that the prime of our life is 30. That's when Jesus started his teaching ministry. That's when the priests started their ministry. I could name several things. We're 30 years old. Now, this is speculation. I will tell you that, but I believe we will teach, we will learn. And the most important thing we're going to do in heaven, because this is a scene that we opened with in Revelation chapter 4, we're going to worship. We're going to realize that the God that has created us for all these exciting and wonderful things forever. And we're going to fall down before him and worship. Think of it like this. We were created with physical bodies. And of course, he gave us a soul and a spirit. That's how we function. To be able to get about in a physical universe. Jesus came to this earth and took on a physical body. Just like we have. And when he was resurrected in a glorified physical body. You look at his body, how different it was after the resurrection. He could appear, he could disappear, he could walk through doors, he could tell what was on people's mind. All these different things that he did. He had no gravity. Gravity had no force on him. He went up into the heavens in the ascension. His body was different, but it was the same. They knew who he was. Exactly. That's, I believe, how we're going to look at heaven. 1 John 3:2 is a very familiar verse in the Bible that just gives us a little bit of idea of what it's going to be like. It says this, "Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is." Isn't that a wonderful verse? We're going to be like him. Heaven, as we learn in these two chapters, is an entirely new creation that springs into being at God's command. We catch our first glimpse here after the great white throne judgment in chapter 20. We leave that, we move into these two chapters, and we move right into chapter 21, and I'm going to look at the first 4 verses. Now again, I'm only covering 8 verses this morning, so we're going to go in depth in particularly these first 4 verses. John writing said, "Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Also there was no more sea." You go, no more sea? "Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, 'Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them, and he will be their God.'" This has been God's goal from the very beginning of the time that he created us in his image. This verse tells us what God's goal has been from then. What beautiful words. The Word of God began in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth, as we know. And he said all that creation was good. In fact, when he created man and woman, he said it wasn't just good, it was very good. Now that's a wonderful thing until it wasn't, until sin came in. But God made a provision for that sin, and you know what that provision was. Actually, in Genesis 3:15, we first saw that provision, that this provision would come from the seed of a woman. The virgin would be born, and that seed would be the Lord Jesus Christ, who would make that provision, which Sean McDowell talked about this morning, and Jesus going to the cross. Isn't he a great communicator?
Yeah.
His father, Josh McDowell, did the same thing as he did. It's not always like father, like son, but in this case, he's teaching apologetics at Biola just like his father did, writing books like his father did. The one difference, and I've read a lot of his father's books too, is he is a great communicator. He just speaks to everybody, very animated, by the way, on the stage. But when God creates a new heaven and a new earth, Nothing can or will go wrong for all those who have chosen God's plan of redemption. God has placed his seal on us forever. Nothing can go wrong. That was his will or desire for us from the very beginning. He wanted us to be with him and dwell with him forever. I'm going to read verses 2 and 3 again because I don't, and this is your theme verse in the paper that I handed out because it's so important. Then John saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. There's a song that was written fairly recently by Bart Miller, and the song was, I Can Only Imagine. Anyone see the movie, Almost There? What a wonderful song, what a wonderful movie. And it became a #1 Christian seller, and it was in the top 10 on all the Billboard. I can tell you, we can only imagine, but these words we just read give us a good imagination. They're real. They're believable. Now, Peter gives us some commentary on what's going to happen to this current earth that we are living in here. And let me go to 2 Peter 3:10 and pick up what Peter says is going to happen to this earth that we live in now, that the earth dwellers love so much and they want to hang on to forever. It's not going to happen. It says, But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens and will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. This heaven, or this earth that we live in, has to be cleansed from sin. And that's what fire does. It cleanses. So that's what's going to happen to this current earth. But the new is coming, and a new heaven and a new earth. Jesus will continue to reign as he did in the kingdom age for 1,000 years, but not just on the earth, but throughout the whole universe. I'm going to talk about 4 things now that I'm just going to kind of put them in a summary form. We're going to go back and look at them a lot closer, but I'm going to talk about these 4 things. The first is the New Jerusalem. It'll be the center of the universe, I believe, where God reigns. And the church reigns with him, where we reside forever, in the New Jerusalem. We talk about heaven, and we talk about a new earth, but our home, the place which Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you, is in the New Jerusalem. That's going to be our home. Number 2, in the Old Testament, Abraham was promised a land forever. And his seed will be on the new earth forever. God said that twice. Genesis 13:15 and 17:18. And he even described the boundaries of the land that was going to be his forever. Now, if we believe the Bible, we got to believe that that promise will come true, because Abraham died not having that promise fulfilled. The next thing is David was promised a throne forever. And he said, you will be on the throne and your house will be in the land. So what I believe, and I could go into detail about that more, and we probably will, that David will be on the throne in the Jerusalem on earth as vice regent of the throne in Jerusalem here on the earth. And it will be the home of the Jews plus. There's not going to be just Jews here on the earth, even though you've heard that said, the Jews will inherit the earth. I'm not sure that's even in the Bible, at least I haven't found it, but they will inherit the earth. But there's going to be others, nations on this earth along with the Jews. We're going to get to that in the next chapter. 4th, the New Jerusalem will be suspended above the earth and will rotate around the earth like a second moon. Now, there are others, because I want to be dogmatic about this, that believe that the earth will revolve around the New Jerusalem because it will be the center of the earth. When we get to the dimensions of this New Jerusalem, you're going to see it's almost as big as the moon. That's big. So, a little bit of speculation here, but the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, it never says it comes all the way down to the earth. It says it comes down out of heaven. Now, let me mention this thing that I mentioned before. There'll be no more sea. Now, you may say, I love the ocean. And we do. In fact, we built a house as close to it as we could get. We love the ocean. We love looking at it. We love walking by it. We used to love doing what these guys do, and that is even getting in it and surfing in it and doing all these different things. I did body surfing, not board surfing. But we love the ocean. In fact, we had a family, a godly family, that was Jenny, our oldest daughter, grew up with, that came to our house. Jenny said, they're just coming by to see the place you live in. Her and her two sons came by. Her one son was a concert pianist, so he jumped on the grand piano that we have in the living room, and he played the entire time we were there. They stayed 4 hours. She said, I just love the ocean. I think it's God's greatest creation. And she just kept on walking out and looking, came by the side. They had another thing to go to in about an hour. They just skipped that. Then somebody said, Mom, we got another thing to go to after that. They just skipped that. They just kept staying. They love the ocean. Here's something that is scientific. I took it from a scientific edition. Over 70% of the surface of our world is covered with salt water. Just salt water. The average depth of the ocean is 2.3 miles. Why does our planet need such a massive covering of salt water? Answer, to cleanse the earth and make life possible. The earth is bathed in God's great antiseptic solution called salt, composed of 96% water, 3.5% salt, and 0.5% trace elements. The salty brine of the ocean purges, cleanses, and preserves our planet, making it fit to live in. Many of the pollutants and waste we produce get washed out of the soil and into our streams and rivers. Others we deliberately dump into the rivers. The rivers wash these materials to the sea. The antiseptic salinity of the sea absorbs, scrubs, and breaks down these pollutants and wastes. The sun heats the sea, causing only pure, clean water vapor to float up into the sky, forming clouds, which bring refreshing rain back to the land. Isn't that amazing? Now, don't get me wrong, there are rivers that are still polluted today because God's perfect order isn't being carried out. If it was, we wouldn't have that. We see places in India and different places of the world where they don't even have fresh water to drink. And that's one of our goals is water for people. We've been giving to that for a long time. It's not as perfect as God created it to be. But the whole process you see God created actually works. Now, in the new heaven and the new earth, there will be no more pollution, no more decay, no more need for cleansing, and thus no more need for a salty sea. But there will be large bodies of fresh waters, perhaps even larger than the Great Lakes. And by the way, there's a lot of surfing that goes around in the world, not in a salty sea. They just create it. We've seen it through our travels. So There's still good news for the surfers. They may still be able to do that in fresh water, not salty water. That way their eyes won't hurt. All right, let me talk a little bit about the new city. John tells us the purpose of the new heaven and new earth is for the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. Now, the church is the bride and the groom is Jesus, because he's getting married to the church. And that's where we will reside, in the New Jerusalem, where he will reside forever. Now, all of us have been to many, many weddings. What is the highlight during the wedding ceremony? What is the highlight of the entire wedding? When the bride comes down the aisle. Everybody stands up, everybody turns around, everybody looks at this beautiful bride coming down the aisle. Dr. J. Vernon McGee in his book said, I have conducted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of weddings. I've never seen a bride that was not beautiful. They're just glowing. Somehow God in that time makes them beautiful. Well, that's what this New Jerusalem is going to be like, coming down out of heaven. That's the way it's described here. So the New Jerusalem, as it comes down from God, is going to be in that New Jerusalem, the redeemed of God, each in a new glorified body. All in their 30s or in their prime. I can't guarantee that, but I believe it. Empowered with limitless energy. Now, what kind of energy is that going to be? Now, I have a theory here too, and I tell you, when I say theory, I can only slightly prove it from Scripture. I believe that energy will come from light, not blood. There is a Psalm 104:2 that says, God is clothed in light. Now, when Jesus was here on this earth in his resurrected body, after he came back, and one of the disciples wanted to touch him to find out if he's real, he said, touch me. Thrust your hand in my side. You will see that I am flesh and what? Bones. He did not say flesh and blood. And Jesus always said flesh and blood up until his resurrected body. He talked about flesh and blood. But then he said flesh and bones. So what's going to be the energy source? Well, you guys know all about this light energy. Not only energy, it cures things, right? That's their new invention that they're working on if China ever gets back into production. But anyway, that's another side. But limitless energy. Now let's look at the home of God. The next purpose of the holy city, the New Jerusalem, will be the dwelling place of God. Verse 3, one more time. That's the key verse. It says, and he will dwell with him, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. That has been his purpose since he conceived that he was going to create man in his image, was this verse right now, that he could be with us and us be with him. The New Jerusalem is a structure, but we, the church, are the city. I'm going to give you something I learned in probably the first grade when I went to school. You probably remember this. See if I can get it right. This is a church. This is a steeple. Open up, and what do you find? The people. The people of the church, not the building, not the structure, anything else. We are the city, really. The New Jerusalem is a structure. The church is the city. The name Emmanuel, meaning God with us, will at last be fulfilled. The new covenant will finally be accomplished. Heaven, as someone has said, will be a place of no more. I'm going to just mention a few. No more sea, no more death, no more sorrow, no more parting, no more pain, no more tears, no more evil. I could go on and on. It'll be a place of no more. By the way, those no mores are not good. What a wonderful hope that we have. Going on in verse 5 and part of verse 6, it says, "Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new." Isn't that great? "And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end." Let me stop right there. God brackets all time in one statement. All time. From in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That wasn't the beginning of God. That was the beginning of his creation here. All time in that one sentence. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Everything in between is our existence in time. By the way, there's going to be one more, no more time. Because it will be eternal. Remember Jesus' last words on the cross? What did he say? He cried out and said, "It is finished." So the work of redemption was finished, but not everything yet was finished. Now he says it is done. This is a completion of that foundation of salvation that he put on the cross. It is done. Let me talk a little bit about the inheritance of the redeemed. Going on in the last part of verse 6 and verse 7. I think that's where I left off. It says this, "I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things." Look at that word, all things. "And I will be his God, and he shall be my son." The only prerequisite for reaching this wonderful home of the redeemed is that you be thirsty. I don't know about you, but I talk to a lot of people in this world today that are not thirsty. I talk to people that belong to our club, El Nagil, our golf club, and I say to them, do you ever consider the fact that you're going to die sometime, and where are you going to go? No, I don't think about that. I just kind of put that out of my mind. And when they get sick, and they will, and they do, and you talk to them, they may have a little bit more interest in it, but they still are not thirsty enough to drink the water. You've got to be thirsty for God. I love this passage in Isaiah 55 too, because he talks exactly about that here. Okay. I got to get far enough back in the Bible. We're in the Old Testament. Isaiah 55. He says, "Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come and buy and eat. Yes, come buy wine and milk without money and without price." What can you buy without any money? You can buy salvation. You can buy eternal life. Why do you spend money for what is not bread, and your wages for what does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me, and eat what is good, and let your soul delight itself in abundance. Wonderful words.
Sonny, did you mean to skip verse 4?
Did I skip verse 4? I didn't mean to skip verse 4. I thought I read it in the beginning. I didn't? "And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away." I talk about it, I just didn't read it. That's a lot of the no mores. Thank you. I'm sure you're familiar with Greg Laurie, the evangelist, used to be to the young. Now he's getting on up in years. But he had an imitation song that was sang by Crystal Lewis. You may remember that song. It was a kind of a takeoff on "Just As I Am." "Come just as you are." She sang that song. And the third verse of that song said this: "Life everlasting, strength for the day, taste the living waters, and never thirst again. I'm going to end with verse 8 because I'm out of time, and we'll just take up where we're at last week. Verse 8 says, "But the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexual, immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake of fire, which burns with brimstone, which is the second death." There's a note of contrast here, referring back to the judgments and referring back to the time we look back to the time we're saved. Now, sometimes we need a reminder of where we came from to appreciate where we're going. I think that's what he's doing here. But for the grace of God, where would we be today? You've heard that saying, "But for the grace of God, there go I," when some beggar person was on a corner. That could be us. Peter writes, "God has called you out of darkness into a kingdom of marvelous light." And that's true. The second death, as we have seen in the final state of the unredeemed, death means separation. We know that. The first death is separation from the spirit and the body. The second death is only experienced by the unbeliever, separation from God for all eternity. Let me talk about the body and the soul for just a minute. People say, where do we go when we die? Let's say a person today. A person today die that's a believer, their soul and spirit go to heaven. And their body goes into the grave. That's separation. Now, a person that is unbelieving goes to a place called Hades. That's their spirit and their soul. By the way, hell isn't open for business yet, even though we talked about it in the last chapter. There's a temporary place that it goes called Hades. God will empty Hades someday, and they will be cast into hell. But the believers that have went before the crucifixion were taken out of paradise, which is the opposite of Hades, and taken up to heaven. That's taught to us by Ephesians chapter 4. So believers that die today go into heaven. Their bodies go into hell. Randy Alcorn, who wrote probably the best book on heaven that's ever been written, according to a lot of people, not just a couple I've named, believe that we will get a temporary body in heaven before the resurrected body. Now, why does he say that? He says that because the Bible talks about that the people that are in hell feel in hell. It doesn't talk about spirits being in hell. It talks about they feel, they touch, they're in torment. And also believers in heaven, how are you going to talk to spirits? How does the spirit talk? How does the spirit get around? So he makes a case for the fact we'll get a temporary body, and then we'll get our resurrected body when we are resurrected. I've gone on too long on this, but there's so much to talk about. We're going to spend another probably 2-3 weeks at least in these last two chapters because it is all so wonderful.